Have you ever played Berserk? I've always been too much of a puss to ever play it. If you saw what I saw, if you felt the sadness I felt, you wouldn't play it either. It was 1981. I remember it was early Saturday morning. The sun had barely risen. Me and my friend Jeff sat outside of the video arcade. We always got up early on Saturday and waited until the video arcade opened. One time we got chairs, we waited so long. Jeff was 19 at the time. He was only a few months older than me. I looked over at Jeff and asked him what time it was. He pulled a leather hand watch out of his pocket. I'd never seen it before. Maybe he stole it. He's always been a little rebellious to the law. He looked down at the watch and told me it was 6:30 a.m. I sighed. "How come we always come so early?" I asked. "I'd told you this a million times," Jeff replied. "I always want to be the first to play Berserk." Berserk? He always plays Berserk. He shakes lightly in excitement as he looks at the arcade machine through the window. We wait another hour. After each hour, more and more people began to show up. They had more common sense than we did. We usually waited 2 to 3 hours for the place to open. At 8 o'clock, a man with a short beard walked up from inside the arcade and unlocked the door. Jeff and I, with the small crowd of people by our side, rushed through the doors of the arcade. Jeff was the first to get to the coin booth. He gave his $5 to the young man on the other side of the counter. He handed Jeff 20 quarters. He clenched the quarters in his fist and jammed it into his back pocket. He ran over to the Berserk machine and slammed the quarter into the slot. He pressed the start button and is greeted to a robotic voice to my knowledge says, "Attack it." A large smile washed upon Jeff's face. He ran through each level, blasting each robot and avoiding the evil smile, or evil Otto as he's called. I refer to him as the death smile. Invincible, unstoppable, evil. After getting my $10 worth in quarters, I pulled a chair and watched Jeff play Berserk. I always watched him because he was always playing it and it creeped me out too much to play it. He rubbed his face on the screen. I can hear him whisper, "Come on, come on." Each time he said it, his voice became louder and more violent. It eventually became so loud that I couldn't hear the ambience of people in the arcade. He shot the last robot on the screen and ran into Otto. The screen flashed. Jeff got the high score. He fell to the ground. At first I thought he was joking and I giggled. His body started to flail on the floor. "Jeff, are you alright?" I asked. "Jeff!" I screamed. Everyone in the arcade stared at the flailing body on the floor. I dropped to my knees and put my hands on his chest. "Call 911, I holler. When I said that, I noticed something evil happen. The screen of Berserk flashed again and you could see the demonic smile, laughing. "It was you," I whisper. I always knew that game was sketchy, but not like this. I started to sob. Jeff's body stopped moving. "Oh my God," I whisper. I put my head on his chest. I holler, "Where's the freaking ambulance?" I lay on his chest for a good 10 minutes. I heard a siren coming from outside. In a matter of moments, twin men pulled me up and grabbed Jeff. They were paramedics. One paramedic tried to revive him. "Clear," he hollered. I saw him shake his head and say no good. The other paramedic ran to the ambulance and grabbed the body bag. I leaned on the wall next to the arcade machine and sobbed. They grabbed Jeff and put him into the bag. They zipped up the bag. The men picked up the bag with Jeff's lifeless body inside and hauled it off the ambulance. The two men put his body into the car, shut the back, and entered the cab. I walked outside and watched the ambulance move out of the parking lot. Jeff died of a heart attack that night. I walked back into the arcade and looked at Berserk. The death smile was still there, laughing. I pointed to the machine and said, "It was you." Out of anger, I drive my fist through the screen. Sparks flare and the screen shattered. I pulled my hand out of the shattered screen and stared at it. There was one shard of glass in my knuckle. A long streak of blood ran down my arm. The owner screams, "Hey man, you crazy?" To which I reply, "No, just angry." I opened the door and stormed out of the arcade. Polybius is an urban legend about a rare arcade game released in 1981. The game was created by a mysterious company called Sinneslution, German for Sense-Deletion, and it was a puzzle / shoot 'em up somewhat like Tempest. It was only released in a few suburbs of Portland, Oregon. It was supposedly very popular, with people forming long lines to play it. However, players reported strange things about the game, such as hearing a woman crying and seeing grotesque faces out of the corner of their eyes. Players would often have nightmares, experience nausea, headaches, blackouts, or even develop amnesia. Some even committed suicide. Others stopped playing video games altogether, and at least one became an anti-video game activist. According to one owner of an arcade, men wearing black suits would often come to collect records from the game. They didn't take any money, simply data on gameplay. Because of this, the leading theory is that it was some sort of government experiment by using subliminal messages. The game remains in obscurity as around 1 month after its release, all of the cabinets suddenly disappeared. One cabinet reappeared in an arcade 1998, but quickly disappeared again. While some have tried to recreate the game, no one has ever found the original ROM. Although, the game can be found available for download at the Sinneslution website. Play it if you like. Misfortune is an obscure game for the original Game Boy. Since no hard copies or ROMs exist, all information about the game is derived from personal accounts and a scant assemblage of screenshots. The game does not contain any credits, and whoever created it is still unknown to this day. The few people who have experienced it consider it to be one of the scariest video games ever made. The player controls what appears to be a young boy in a strange gothic building. After brief exploring, the player is confronted by a malevolent being. Despite the character never identifying itself, some people, citing notable similarities, claim that it may be a representation of Baphomet, Beelzebub, or even the devil. Upon meeting the mysterious creature, a dialogue box will appear with the text, "I exist within the very fabric of reality. Do you want to challenge me?" This is followed by a yes or no choice. Should the player choose yes, the being replies, "Then let's begin." The player is then transported to a series of maze-like rooms, each filled with pit traps, locked doors, keys, and traps. The objective for the player is to progress through each room by either reaching the stairs to the next level or solving another kind of puzzle. This can include answering riddles or choosing correct doors or pathways. The most well-known example is in a level where small cabins are shown on screen, 4 of them to be exact. A dialogue box will appear that reads, "Choose wrong, and misfortune will befall your loved ones." Are you ready to play? Should the player ever make a mistake throughout this game, the screen will cut to black before showing a more detailed image of the demon along with the dialogue box reading, "I am God here," in what appears to be blood-styled writing. Rumors pertaining to the game's alleged harmful effects began to surface on the internet around the late 1990s. Players claim to have begun experiencing ongoing depression and dread shortly after losing and seeing the game over screen. Once prominent members of online forums who told such claims are thought to have died or disappeared when they suddenly became inactive without warning. Heated discussions soon dominated these forums for some time, but the mystery never seemed to be getting any closer to being solved. Some wrote the whole thing off as a tasteless practical joke. Others really believed that viewing the image of the evil character after losing the game can really cause the player to experience misfortune, as the game's antagonist promised. Soon people began to speculate that the eerie soundtrack of the game was the cause. The music in the game consisted of deep, buzzy tones and off-key melodies. The game had a remarkably unsettling soundtrack, despite composition being limited to the 8-bit Game Boy sound bank. The game over screen had especially erratic, almost nauseating music with very high frequency that accompanied it. Rumor has it that this very track could somehow influence moods and thought patterns. Of all the tracks in the game, only the theme that plays when first meeting the demonic entity can be found on the internet today. Searching for playable ROMs or cartridges online is futile because none exist. In fact, most of these who have played it directly hadn't sought out looking for it, but rather stumbled upon it by accident. According to a first-hand accounts, certain copies of various Game Boy titles contain Misfortune in its entirety. The means for accessing it through these games vary, but typically involve exploiting glitches or using cheating devices. Although some had detailed what they had done to trigger Misfortune to start, attempts by others using the same methods had always failed. Another common observation was that many of the sprites in Misfortune had been copied from its host games. Misfortune is known to be integrated in the following: Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, Pokemon Red, Spud's Adventure, Poochie Carrot, and Atellar Mary. For this section, I'm going to be speaking to you in a lot less impartially and a lot more personally. It's important that you listen to this part. Now, is the game really cursed? Does a specter really bide within and snare the innocent in this deadly game? Who knows? What I do know is that the game definitely exists. I also know what it can do. I've never played it myself, you see, but I knew someone who did. A good friend of mine, actually. We were closer than brothers, and we told each other everything. He was the most enthusiastic, outgoing guy I ever met, and like me, he was really into video games. Sure enough, one day he told me that he found a spooky new side game hidden in Pokemon. He showed it to me, and even back then it gave me an odd feeling, though, to be fair, I was always easily scared. Soon after, he started talking less and less. Later, he'd either ignore my calls or tell me he was sick or busy when I invited him out. He became something of a recluse. I did still sometimes get to see him in high school, but he rarely spoke and snapped at me when I pried too much over why he was acting this way. About a month later, before he got off the train after school, he said goodbye for the first time in weeks. I'll never forget the look he gave me that day. He was the macho, nothing gets to me type of guy, and he always masked his emotion really well, but now he had a face filled with grief, like he was about to cry. He made me promise him one thing before he left, that I never play that game. That was the last time we spoke. The next morning, they found his scratched corpse hanging from his disassembled weight machine. The police had concluded that he managed to lift 220 pounds of weights over his head with the cord still attached, looped it around his neck, and released it over the side of the machine, causing his strangulation as the weight on the other side yanked him upwards. The most horrible detail was that he was found with his hands inside the makeshift noose, clutching it as if he were trying to tug it loose. That was it, the case was closed. Personally, I don't believe that's what happened. If you're a collector or perhaps just heard the legend and you want to experience the game yourself, you should reconsider. Even if you deny the existence of demons and curses, the misfortune that will befall you is very real. You have been warned.